Hello friends, today I am doing the book murderer tag, and I've seen this tag done by a few other booktubers, and at first I thought it had something to do with Halloween or the horror genre, but then I realized what it's about. It's about book maintenance, how you treat books, how you care about those sheets of paper bound together that we call a book. And I have some very strong opinions. I have some more open-minded or amorphous opinions that are open to be changed. And I also have changed myself how I take care of books over the years. So I thought I would do this tag, share my thoughts, and more importantly, hear what you think as well in the comments. So without further ado, I've got some books beside me to reference for some of my opinions. Let's get to it. The first question on this prompt is, what are your thoughts on spine breaking? And I think this question requires a distinction. There's accidental spine breaking and there's intentional spine breaking. On the intentional side, I think it is a heinous act. I've seen a few Instagram reels where as soon as someone gets a book, they just crank and crack the spine. Those people, they need help. They need serious remediation and help to be allowed back into the book community. Now, on the accidental side of spine breaking, this is where it gets complicated. I think a lot of this is dependent upon the edition you buy. I try my best, especially nowadays, to avoid buying paperbacks that are very prone to a spinal break or just don't have that long-term durability factor to them. For example, Penguin Classics. They are cheaply made, but well made for the purpose and for the price. But let's be honest, they're cheaply made, they're mass produced, and that's fine. But when you buy a certain Penguin Classic that's above, let's say like 500 pages, you're gonna crack the spine. You're going to break that spine just because of the sheer size of the book. I see it with the Penguin Classic of War and Peace. You see it with Victor Hugo's books. You see it. I have it with Immanuel Kant's Critique Pure of Reason. Critique of Pure Reason. But you see it with a lot of those larger, chunkier Penguin Classics, and just with chunkier paperbacks in general. Now, when it comes to how do I try and avoid that, there's certain editions or publishers that use, I don't know the exact material of the cover and the spine, but it seems to be more resistant to that. For example, all of my Dostoevsky books pretty much are of this vintage classics publisher. And I really like these editions because as big as this Brothers of Karamazov is, and I have the same thing with Demons up there, they're pretty resistant to breaking. They might have a little bit of a bow or bend to them, but they generally stay in pretty good condition. They fit and feel really good in your hand. I was telling my friend this the other day at a used bookstore, why I like vintage editions. Because they just feel good when you kind of flop them open at like page 500, but they retain the spine. So that's what I'd say. I think there's a clear distinction between intentional and accidental. So that's what I would say with breaking the spines. I try and avoid it, but with cheaper made paperbacks, it just happens sometimes if you really read the book often. The second question is bookmarks or dog-earing pages. So I don't really use bookmarks that much, but I'll get to what I do use quite often. On the dog-earing pages side of things, I feel like that falls into the same category of damaging your books or breaking the spine, or we'll get to this later, but like writing in them. Anything that's going to damage the actual paper or the spine or the construction of the book, I try and avoid any kind of putting my own impression into the book or, again, damaging the quality of it. So with that in mind, I do, though, mark pages, and I mark them with tabs. And the tabs I use are just generic ones on Amazon or ones that my wife gets me from Amazon. And they don't damage the pages. I can adjust them, move them, remove them from the book. There's no damage to the pages. And you'll see that in a lot of my books. You've probably seen it in past videos I've done where I do have a lot of bookmarks. I think this is an easy way to refer back to certain sections in the book without, again, damaging the pages at all. I don't think there's any harm in that. And you could probably do it in different ways too, whether it's sticky notes or any kind of tab form. The third question is page tearing or ripping. This is a criminal offense, my friends, and I think that you will be granted a hearing, but I cannot promise that you will be granted an attorney. Jokes aside, I don't know what to say to this question. I don't know why in the world you would ever tear a page, you would ever rip it or anything like that. doesn't make sense to me. So I'll leave it there. I think it is, once again, a criminal offense that requires some kind of punishment or remediation before you're allowed to be welcomed back into the book community. The fourth question is probably the most interesting prompt in this entire tag, and that's writing in your books. To me, this question has the most wiggle room because you have to consider a few factors. One, how do you value the book as an object versus purely for its contents? How do you romanticize the book and the pages? And how do you care about certain editions? Does it matter whether it's a brand new paperback versus an older hardcover? And what kind of writing are you doing within the book? Is it underlining? Is it a bunch of writing? Is it in pen or is it in pencil? There's a lot of wiggle room to this. So speaking personally, this has changed for me over the years. Early on, I did a lot of writing in my books because I felt like that was the best way for me to annotate, to have that conversation back and forth with the author or engage in a literal form with the text. So you'll notice in a lot of my philosophical books, this one from Nietzsche, for example, I not only have a lot of tabs, but I do have a lot of writing within the margins, on the side, all of that, plenty of underlining. And as I've become a more mature reader, as I've started to collect more books, especially more rare books, I don't write in my books anymore. I really have almost gotten away from it entirely. What I mean is I still do some underlining, but even that has become very scarce, and I think I am fully weeding that out of how I annotate. If you watch my annotation video, I do a lot of my note-taking in Notion. I do it digitally, so I pull those quotes out. I still do tabs, so I can still kind of refer back to the pages. And in my notes, I always leave page numbers as well. I paraphrase, I write my notes, I put my thoughts down, all of that digitally. Now, the reason I don't want to write in them anymore is because, and this leads me to another key component of the question, is do you romanticize books or objects for that matter? Because there's people that only view books for the contents that they can get from any edition. They can get in an ebook form, they can get in an audiobook form perhaps. But then there's people, and I'm more in this camp, that do romanticize a bit of the object. It's people that do care about antiques, that love getting a used edition, that cherish rare or vintage editions of things. And to me, I'm more in that camp where, especially if I'm getting an older edition of something like, let's say, this folio edition of The Knight in Panther's Skin, when it arrived and it was bent to hell, I was heartbroken. Not just because, oh, I spent this money, but this book is never going to be in its right form. It's always going to be a little bit bent. It's always going to be just screwed up a bit and some of the pages ruined. And that saddens me to think that a book from either the 40s or 50s or 20s or older can get kind of ruined in that way. And as I've become more of a mature reader and how my thoughts have changed over the time, I don't want to earmark pages. I don't want to write in them anymore. I don't even want to underline. Even though I do very straight underlining with essentially like a guide, I still feel like I am damaging something permanently that I can no longer, I don't know, I just feel like I'm staining it if I am writing in it or damaging the book in any way that diminishes its original form or value or components. Now, a few examples of that would be this nice edition of Gravity's Rainbow that I have. These pages are already worn out a little bit from sun exposure. The cover already has a little scratch from it, and I bought it like that. But I want to maintain it as best I can, and so I did tab it in plenty of sections as I try and understand it, this book. But I didn't write in it at all, and I didn't underline. Whereas this other iffy situation where I had this older Signet Classic of a Oblomov, I tabbed it, but I also did underline in it, and I felt weird about underlining in it. I feel a little bit guilty still for doing it. They're very straight underlines, but in a way that you still can read it perfectly fine. It didn't ruin anything, but and it's not a super rare or something edition, but I still just feel a little gross about it. Whereas I don't mind writing in a mass market paperback like a Penguin Classic, just because they're so mass produced. You can buy another one of these on Amazon tomorrow. And even if this becomes old in, 60 years from now, there's going to be a million of these floating around versus certain editions like Mikhail Bulgakov's A Heart of a Dog. How many of these are left and in good condition? I mean, this one's even fallen apart a little bit on the binding, so I have to be really careful when I read it. Small stains here. I just don't want to add on to any damage that the book has already incurred. But with these mass market paperbacks, I don't care as much. So most of the books I'm buying these days, especially if they're hardcovers, if they're nice, I am abstaining really completely from any writing, but especially if they're older books, I have a reverence and a romantic idea of the object. And I think that's just a personal thing. You either have that or you don't. It's not right or it's wrong. But that's my very long-winded thoughts on writing in books. Oh, and last note is the idea of pencil versus pen. I think I will switch to pencil writing here very soon, just because that still allows me to do a bit of faint underlining. The reason I always do pen, and probably most of you write in pen, is it just feels good. It feels good, it looks nice, but it's permanent. So you are permanently staining that page versus pencil. There's probably a little bit of a faint look that will still be there from the pencil, but it is something that can be erased or removed. So that is a component that if you're writing with pencil, perhaps it's less of a felonious endeavor, but it's interesting. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts below. Do you romanticize the book or not? Do you write in it? Why not? Has it changed? You'll have to let me know. And the last question on this prompt is ripping covers and book binding. This is another act that will likely get you sent to the gulags, but facetious joke about a murderous labor camp aside, I don't really understand why people would do this. I have seen, especially on my wife's side of of the book community and fantasy reading and all of that, I think a lot of people have gotten more creative with taking like paperbacks and giving them these more elaborate designs or ripping off the covers and putting them into hardcovers. That I think makes sense. In fact, my copy of Mircea Cartarescu's Solenoid is starting to fall apart in that binding. And I'm thinking if it does do that, I'll either get it simply repaired, or I might see if I can get it sent somewhere to make it in a hardcover and have it rebound that way. Which shout out to Amy's, I think it's Amy's Dusty Bookshelf, but she has a great video. I believe it's years old, but describing that paperbacks originally, I didn't know this, but paperbacks originally, if I get this correct, were made purely to just be a cheap kind of cover and protection for your book before you would take it somewhere to get it leather bound, cloth bound before it goes on your shelf. Then as things changed over the years, people just ended up using the paperback and not getting it bound in a leather or cloth format and just reading the paperback. And now we have paperbacks as a much cheaper and accessible option for people. But back to the original question, I would never do this at all with any older books. As I mentioned, this one from Bulgakov, I will likely try to, if this binding does fall apart, just get it re-glued, get it fixed. Same with any of my other books. With newer books, again, I guess they build that romanticism and that reverence over years. So if it's like a new edition of some book from 2017, I don't think it's necessarily a horrible act to kind of have your own cover done to it or do something creative like that. And any other use of ripping off covers, I don't understand at all. But yeah, that would be my idea of rebounding or altering the cover of a book. Is if you're doing it to something, if you're doing some creative endeavor to a new book, okay, but don't mess with old books. Leave them alone. And that is it for this book tag. I think it brings up a lot of interesting questions with not only how we take care of our books and maintain them, how we view used copies, how will it stop you from buying a used copy if it's got highlights in it or writing or not, to what extent does that stop you if it's underlining versus actual writing the margins. But it also begs the question of how you view the object of the book itself. I think that's a very interesting question. And a personal one as well. So let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more content like this. And I'll see you all in the next video.